Thank you, and thank you very much for joining us today, everyone in the audience or anyone who plays this at a later date. We appreciate the invitation from South Carolina Realtors Association to help get through some of this confusing information out there, talk about the laws exactly, talk about ways to get you help, and hopefully demystify this a little bit for you. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in to get through the content I want to cover. I also would just ask that we hold questions till the end so we get through everything, but Michael will be recording questions and then he'll ask them at the end. So please place those in chat and we'll be sure that we cover them for you. So digital accessibility is really the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with websites and apps for people with disabilities. The picture, as always, pictures are better usually than a lot of dialogue. But back in the 1990s, ADA compliance was about physical space and ramps and wider doorways, and the internet was not around when President Bush put that into action in 1990. So they didn't consider digital property or the public space of the internet as we know it now. Assistive technologies come in multiple forms. I'm just showing 4 of them here on the screen. You may have seen people with paralysis or other disabilities use some of these, sometimes in connection to wheelchairs and other things to get them around physically, but we're talking about things like a sip and puff, the one in the upper left. If someone is paralyzed, they can actually still go on the internet, they can shop and buy things, they can look for homes, they can do everything. It just takes them a little bit longer to do it. The switch in the upper right is an example of kind of a much simpler mouse action if somebody can't manipulate a mouse like most of us can. The one in the bottom left is actually a retinal recognition mouse, and so individuals will use their eyes and blinking in order to activate a computer. And the one on the bottom right is something I've tried, and that's actually a Braille laptop or a Braille display. And so the 6 dots that create the Braille alphabet send information to people over the internet who cannot see what's on there. I love this saying from another Minnesota company, IBM. Mary Pat Rodabaugh was one of the leaders in accessibility as they thought about it at IBM. And for most people, technology makes things easier. It also makes us busier, I think, right? We can do so much in so little time. But for people with disabilities, technology makes things possible, right? So they can get on the internet and do things on their smartphones that they wouldn't normally be able to do without proper code or assistive technologies. The one that the gentleman's using in the right-hand picture is just a Zoom text. I do a lot of public speaking and community education, and also teach continuing education for attorneys. And as an icebreaker, I often ask the attorneys that are present in the room if any of them have made the font larger on their text messaging. So I do get some hands raised then, and I applaud them and let them know that they are actually part of the accessible community. So just zooming text is a simple thing to do on a website and helps a lot of people. The number of people with disabilities is really surprising to most when they learn that it's 1 in 5, nearly 56.7 million people. They've got a large disposable income. They have a wide range of disabilities across the 4 categories listed below. And it's important to understand, too, that people move in and out of disabled status. When my mom had a stroke, she didn't have use of her right hand, and so it was a little bit difficult for her to do her online banking and schedule appointments. That got better, but there is a reason for the concept that we're talking about today, and it isn't just for people who are currently disabled. This is also for people who will eventually age and become disabled, and I don't know of everybody else's plans, but my plan is to live as long as possible. I'm dependent on technology, and so I look forward to making sure that the internet and our smartphones all work for us as we age. The Wall Street Journal did a great series of articles about the aging population. So I just want you to think about the fact that it's the currently disabled, but the fact is we're all going to get there. There's a true business case for accessibility. The first one really obviously is the social responsibility. Equitable access helps close the digital divide. None of you would ever think of not making your offices accessible to people with disabilities to come in and find a home for their family. And so it makes sense that you wouldn't want your website to either, especially with the amount of business that's done on the web, right? All of the searches and everything else. On new builds, it's much more cost-effective to put it in the beginning. I use the analogy that it's kind of like building a house and then deciding, or sheetrocking and then deciding where you want your outlets. So building this from the core up on any new builds is really in your best interest for sure. If you or any individual agents in your office get targeted, the cost of legal activity is then added to the accessibility project. So it really comes down to, do you want one project or do you want two? Really is what I tell businesses. Banking, medical, e-commerce, business, highly targeted, education and government sites are already supposed to comply. I'll tell you that I'm aware of one plaintiff law firm in the city of Chicago in 2016 that one day sent out 50 demand letters to real estate agencies. And because your business is so consumer facing and there's so much interaction on the internet in your business, I anticipate it being refocused on this coming summer. I don't have any insider information, I just watch a lot of trends. So the need for website accessibility, I think we can all just agree, you want to include as many people in your audience as possible, right? These people live in homes and there's no reason why you shouldn't be helping them find their next one. It is being required. The plaintiff law firms are so incredibly active, and I said I watch this and I see the trends. I'm stunned at how many are getting into it. I'm stunned at the tactics they take. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but the general public is really demanding equitable access. If you think about another much smaller group, and I don't want to make this political whatsoever, but there's a very small group of people that got a presidential mandate for a fourth set of bathrooms, and that is less than 0.5% of the population. When I talk about this, I just want to reiterate the fact that this is a very large group of people, and once they're, lobbyists and once they're interested, supporting people, get this movement going, there really is no way of stopping it, in our opinion. So, nor in anybody else's really in the industry. There's this target deadline of fiscal year 2018, and I'll explain what that is in a little bit later too. It's not for sure, it's not definite, but it is what everybody in the industry is looking towards, and all the policymakers. So I'll give you more clarity on that later. Here's how we can help you guys. If you're served a demand letter or you're sued, the first thing to do is get an accessibility audit by a live user. We'll provide a roadmap for the accessibility process. If not, if you haven't been, I just encourage you to use 2017 as a year to start this project and get ahead of it so you can reduce your risk of being targeted. Our action steps are pretty simple. I'll go through this a little bit later in more detail, but audit your desktop and your mobile sites first. Worry about apps after that. Anything that requires a login on your site, if you have that, don't worry about that. Anything that anyone that goes to your site publicly could access is what you need to focus on first and foremost. So if anyone's telling you you've got to do this whole, everything all in one fell swoop, that's it's one way to do it, I guess, but I personally and professionally don't think it's necessary. Focus on that desktop, and if your mobile sites are responsive, that's great. If you have a separate mobile site, focus on that second, and then your apps and that priority. Any PDF documents you have on there, you'd want to get those checked. If your real estate company accepts applications online for receptionists or agents or anything, this is already a law because this is Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act. You cannot discriminate against people based on a disability. If the HR portal where you accept applications is not accessible to those with disabilities, you could face legal action already. So that's one particular smaller area, which is often, frankly, overlooked by companies. So bring in your HR and talk through that about how you have applications online. Train the internal staff and document the accessibility project. I'll give you a little tip there. If you see that, that code A11Y, that is just our industry lingo of shortening the word accessibility. So don't let that throw you anywhere. Get legal advice if you're targeted. I highly advise that. Work with your vendors on your websites. If you have additional marketing companies or anybody else that provides any services on your website, make sure that you're holding them accountable for compliance as well. And then, of course, monitoring is part of the whole plan. So let me go through what the actual laws are so there's a clear understanding of those. We're really talking about two here in the United States. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which has two parts. I think it's surprising for people to learn that this is an area where the United States is actually very far behind the rest of the world. The UK, Canada, and the EU countries, Australia included, most other first world countries already have changed their version of the Disabilities Act to specifically include digital properties, websites, apps, all those things. Here's the reality though. They don't necessarily have compliance sites, and they don't have the litigious environment that we do in the United States. And so they're really focused right now, especially in London and the UK countries, on cookies and tracking and privacy. And if you go to any website that is operated out of the UK, the first thing that pops up is a little box that you have to check in order to proceed, which says, I allow you to track cookies. So they're just focused on something different, but the important thing is they're ahead of us in the law, which is really interesting. Some states have laws. We don't really get into that too much because it really doesn't come into play. So the first law, which this whole concept was started with, was the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This just had to do with either federal agencies or companies that receive federal financial assistance. So if you think of schools, land-grant universities, FAFSA, if you fill those out for your kids, any place like that. And then medical. So if they take funds from the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid or Medicare, those are federally funded assistance programs. So they would already need to be compliant due to Section 504. And then Section 508 covers federal agencies' government websites. So the federal websites, the state, county, and city websites should all already be compliant. I'll tell you, they're not. There's a lot of people researching this across the nation, and they need to up their game as well. But that is the first law. The second one is the one that most has to do with your business, right? So the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 has three parts to it. Title I is employment, and that's what I spoke about earlier with your HR portals. If you do accept applications online, call and ask for some strategies on how to reduce your risk of being targeted for that, because that already is a law and you're held accountable for that. And then there's two other areas. Title II are public entities. Again, those federal, state, and local governments and any public education. And then realtors fall into, and real estate agent companies fall into the Title III public accommodations, stores, banks, theaters, libraries, bars, restaurants, etc. Any of your offices, mortgage companies, any of that kind of thing. Now, Title III has a few more details in it, but let me first round out a couple of additional ones. Communications Act, which amended the Telecommunications Act. There's some laws out there that have come about auditory disabilities in and of themselves. So the Telecommunications Act speaks to closed captioning. Movie theaters are now being asked to make sure that they offer closed captioning at movie theaters. The UN also has a really strong statement about this. They take it on the basis of civil rights, and a lot of companies internationally also will refer to the UN's rights of persons with disabilities. So that Title III, public accommodations, you may have heard that you have to have a bricks and mortar building and a website in order to be required to be compliant. You may have heard that there's no real requirement. You may have heard, different things. There are many circuit courts across the nation. Let me show you this first. This is the different district courts across the United States, and this is where sometimes some of the confusion runs in. In the 7th District Court, they have made some rulings, some judges have made some rulings that the nexus is not required. So the nexus is the connection between the bricks and mortar and the online website. By contrast, the 9th Circuit Court has adopted a much more restrictive place of public accommodation, and it says you do not need to have a bricks and mortar building and a online. Online businesses in and of themselves must be compliant to the ADA because they are accessible to the public via the internet. So if you're interested in more information about the different laws, I can go deep into this. I don't think that's really where your primary concern is today, but I'm just making an assumption. The thing to remember about this overall is that there's a lot of things happening on this topic. Interestingly enough, there's this very, very current certiorari petition, and these are petitions that are brought in front of the United States Supreme Court. Coca-Cola has a vending machine that looks like the one pictured down in the bottom right. If you think about the fact that bricks and mortar is a place of public accommodation that you must step into, and then it is a public space, and therefore the ADA applies to it, the concept of stepping up to something, kiosks at Target, pricing, scanning, barcoding, all of these things where we're out in retail stores and they're a technology that you step up to, kind of like the ATMs back in the day. If the United States Supreme Court takes this case, which we'll find out really soon, it will be the first time that this is brought onto that level, obviously. And the question presented to them is whether Title III of the ADA only applies to physical spaces that people can enter, or if it is also just something you could walk into. So again, if you're really curious about the law, you can figure out which circuit court you're in. Here's the rulings on them. I'll caution you that this really only comes into play if you're ready to go to court, right? If you want to take a legal action that brought against you or your real estate company or mortgage company all the way to a trial, then this would come into play. But I wanted to give you the background so that you understood that we have a deep understanding about what the laws are, and we can help advise you. We're never going to give you legal advice. We'll always advise that you speak to an attorney about that. But we're well informed on these issues, and we're watching them for you closely. The targets for legal activity: hundreds of websites have been sued for violations to the ADA. The interesting trend on that is since 2015, there's been over 240, probably over 280 now as of last week. Every month, they seem to increase in sharp numbers. Target was sued years ago. Netflix was sued, way back in, a couple of years ago as well. So my point in this is it's heating up. I should change the second bullet to read tens of thousands of demand letters out there, maybe even hundreds, I'm not sure. The targets are both large and small. In a different business vertical than yours, community banking, I can share that 40% of community banks have received a demand letter. Now, will one of these plaintiff law firms get in here and go after real estate companies and insurance companies and, things that are very similar? I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. So I just want to let you know what's going on out there. But I wanted to bring some specific information about your industry, the National Association of Realtors, and your president last year in 2016. They've taken steps. You may already have done this research, you may not have, so I just wanted to provide some specific industry information for you guys. There's some key takeaways from an article written by Andrea Brambola, who is a staff writer there, and her points were this: it's likely only a matter of time before the DOJ mandates website accessibility under the ADA. Agents, brokers, associations, MLSs are all at risk of litigation if they're publicly facing websites or their online internal systems are not ADA compliant. And she brings forth the concept that there are some concrete steps real estate businesses can take to get ahead of the issue. I couldn't agree more. There are things that you can do, and that's what I'll get into next. Tom Solomon, the 2016 president of NAR, wrote a letter actually to the work group that is making adjustments to the disabilities law. If you remember back in 2015, November, that was the date where the Department of Justice was supposed to change the law or say that they're not going to change the law to make websites mandated by federal law to be accessible. That date came and passed. Those of us on committees and working towards this think that perhaps maybe the language that they were going to write at that time, they felt it might quickly be outdated. Government doesn't really move too fast in technology, right? But the important thing to realize is that they kind of kicked it down the road, and they've said that fiscal year 2018 is when they're going to make these final recommendations. My company is participating in some town hall meetings across the nation where the Department of Justice and the work group that's working on this is taking final comments and that kind of thing. And if there's any updates or anything on how that falls out, you can always get more updated information from our website. There are common elements of any of the prior Department of Justice settlements. And I want to talk about this because the way that we've developed our services and our kind of game plan for helping people proactively with this is really based on what we see the DOJ ruling and making people be accountable for if they settle, if the Department of Justice gets involved, if they issue what's called a statement of interest on your individual case, if there's one. Those common elements of the settlements with the DOJ include, number one, first and foremost, engage an independent accessibility consultant for an audit. So that's a company like A360. That your websites and apps meet WCAG 2.0 level AA. If you've had any concern or questions, or your IT teams or any of you developers out there on the webinar are wondering about which guideline you're supposed to follow, it is very clear, and it is this, WCAG 2.0 level AA. There are 3 levels, of course, A, AA, and AAA. A is very minimal, and AAA is pretty pie in the sky. It's a lot of work. It's, I think, a little outside and not necessary. I don't think anybody, nor does our company, recommend that you have to go to that level, and we certainly put that forth through any work groups as well. WCAG 2.0 level AA is very, very common around the globe as well. Most of those other countries, almost every single one accepts that. Some countries have some additional guidelines, but that really is the clear set. So I hope that clears that up for you. Also, designate an accessibility coordinator. Take one of your IT team members or e-commerce marketers or digital people that you have at the company and add accessibility coordinator to their job description. Put it in their title. Publish an accessibility policy on your website, and I can show you a couple of examples of that if we have time. Offer a way to solicit feedback, maybe improve telephone support on your website. That's a really good tactic too. It's something that you would ultimately be required to do. Post a logo. This is asked by a lot of plaintiff attorneys, that you post a logo. I want to just share a couple of interesting things about that. I've read hundreds of these demand letters, and I've read through lots and lots and lots of lawsuits. A couple of the plaintiff law firms, and by the way, the state of Pennsylvania, Florida, and some other East Coast areas are where some of the most prolific plaintiff attorneys are. I'll mention some of them: Carlson Lynch, Lee Litigation Group, Scott Dinnan, who is out of Miami. They're very, very active in this, and there's a lot of others, but those really seem to be. Hanning is another new one that's coming on the site. On the scene, excuse me. If you're in one of those states that has one of these very active plaintiff law firms, I can't stress enough that you should be the first to do something. They typically look in their own backyard for victims. We have a very mixed opinion of the work of the plaintiff attorneys. My personal opinion is, I know what they're bringing forth is not wrong. I can see by auditing the websites that they are not accessible to people with disabilities and they don't meet WCAG 2.0. However, their methods, in my personal opinion, leave a little bit to be desired. It's a true marketing machine. A little more insight on that topic is I've had the pleasure of working with some really large national ADA defense attorneys across the nation, and they differ a little bit on their approach. Let me share with you. Some of them advise you to not contact the plaintiff's attorney if you get a demand letter right away. What they suggest doing is call somebody for an audit, start making changes to your site, and then engage with them for a negotiation. Other attorneys feel like you should contact them right away and start the dialogue. The ones that advise waiting and getting your ducks in a row first bring forth the concept of, they send out so many of these demand letters that if you respond to them, they move you into the active, group, and they focus on you. So I'm not advising you either way. Again, speak to your lawyer, either in-house or an external expert in ADA defense. But I just wanted to share with you the different strategies and concepts by lawyers out there. Posting a logo on your website. In those demand letters or in the lawsuits, several of the plaintiff attorneys asked to post that similar logo to like a handicap parking sticker in a parking lot. I've never seen that on any website to date. What I do see go up is the logos of the companies who are helping you audit. We do that. A couple others maybe do, but that's something that our clients are really liking, because if you enter into an audit with us, we'll put up a logo that says under review by A360, and that also is a nice risk reduction tactic to put the flag on the moon that says we started our accessibility project, in June of 2017. We've done all these things, and if later on in the year or wherever you get a letter, you can, just tell them, look, we're not paying you anything in settlement, and we've got this underway. You didn't bring it to our attention and all that. So that's what I can share about the powerful use of having a logo up. The other reason for having a logo up is it indicates to people and their families and friends that you're a realtor, a broker, a mortgage company, a real estate company that wants to be inclusive, that you want to work with people with disabilities and help them find a home. And that's just a great positive PR move. Two last things on the Department of Justice settlement. Training and continuing to monitor. So get the people inside or your independent web developers some training. And also, as I said earlier, require the vendors to comply with guidelines, because that's very important. So here's what we do at our company. We provide live user accessibility audits or assessments of the website to ensure that they can be used by disabled individuals who access the internet with the use of those assistive technologies, the most common one being a screen reader. The established guideline, again, is WCAG 2.0. After we audit to those guidelines, we support the company in remediation. You'll get a very detailed technical report from us that your web development team will use in order to make the fixes to the actual code. This is something that our clients love because of the level of detail and the level of customization to it. So when our teams of two, one disabled auditor, technologist, web developer, and one non, go through your website and look for issues that would cause somebody to not have equitable access to the site, content, or anything else, we document those in a very specific and detailed way. We tell you which page they're on, where the item not meeting WCAG is located, what it is, what type, right? Is it a link? Is it a heading? What's the problem on a slider, something like that? We'll tell you exactly which WCAG guidelines are violated with it. And then we'll indicate which audience is affected by it. So we'll tell you that this is a problem for anybody accessing your site with a screen reader or anyone accessing your site with keyboard-only navigation. Keyboard-only navigation is something pretty easy for you guys to test by yourself. You can load your web page and then try to conduct business on it, make an appointment, look at a house, do anything, fill out an application for a mortgage, only using your keyboard, not your mouse. And if we have time, I'll show you one of those maybe on a site. And then we provide training if you need it. We do what's called an accessibility QA, or quality assurance, after your team has fixed the issues. We just recheck it, right? We do another live user audit to make sure that everything's working. And then we continuously monitor digital properties. The way monitoring works is, again, we do not ask that you sign up for an automatic scanning tool or a subscription service. We'll watch your website for any changes, and then depending on how often you make changes, maybe quarterly, maybe only twice a year, depending on how much you're changing the format or functions of your website, we'll go in and do another live user audit on the things that have changed, because we want to make sure the new elements that you put up are accessible. People often wonder, how much is this going to cost me? So I throw this in here at this point in the conversation so we can all get on the same wavelength about what this looks like. It is a technical test. It is a manual test. It is not free. It is detailed, and it is far less than any type of settlement that you would pay, is my introduction to this. We've worked with the South Carolina Realtors board to put together a special offer to the people that are present on the website, in the hopes that we can help as many as we can proactively not get targeted and make your sites accessible, thus increasing your business opportunities. So we have two different levels. We can look at 5 pages of your website for $2,500, or we can look at up to 15 for a price of $5,000. Included in that is that under review badging, which you see there. There's 3 different examples of that. We'll do the QA, as we talked about earlier. We'll help you write an accessibility statement. We can give you language for that accessibility coordinator. And then we'll lock you in for 3 years on monitoring. Monitoring is not something that we have a cookie cutter approach to. We really need to talk to you individually and see how much you need. If you don't need it, but once or twice a year or maybe annually, then that's what we'll do for you. If you're a large company and you're making changes to your website functionality and all of that stuff often, then we can look at monthly or quarterly. I'm not talking about just loading new images. I'm talking about changing actually the layout, the templates, and that kind of thing. Images in real estate are probably one of the things that people are most concerned about, right? The pictures and how you describe the homes and that kind of thing. I use this slide to talk about the different ways to make sure that your web developers or any of the techs on the webinar understand how to make sure things are accessible. This could be a whole nother webinar in and of itself, but when you're designing new page templates or a new landing page, or you're trying to remediate and use our audit report to fix your site, the best thing to do is just make sure that all the HTML5 is pure, that it's all great semantic markup, mark up all your headings and your subheadings, and make sure everything is labeled correctly, your links, all that kind of thing. CSS is a type of coding, obviously cascading style sheets, that allows web content to be separated from how you visually present it. And what that means is you use cascading style sheets or CSS coding in order to make changes to the templates on your website, and thus they cascade through all the other templates. And so when you fix an accessibility issue that we find using CSS, it will push through to all your templates. One of the, I think, scary things for people is, how long does this take and how do you fix it? There might be hundreds of issues on your website. Honestly, it's not uncommon at all. You could have 700 if you're a huge site, but they all fall into one category or another category, correct? So we help you sort those, and then we prioritize for you which ones to fix first. The reason is because if you fix the ones that we recommend first, you may take care of a lot of other issues on the audit report, and that may help you move forward quickly. It's really important to understand, too, that when your site meets WCAG 2.0, your search engine optimization is going to go through the roof. This is a little trade secret here that a lot of people don't want lay people to understand, right? You talk about, I held a real estate license for 13 years, my husband is a broker, but in the state of Minnesota, when we learn real estate, you talk about the wolves and the lambs, right? And you know more, and you've got to watch out for them. Development's no different. Technology is kind of the same. There's a lot of companies out there that you may be paying for search engine optimization and search engine marketing. Well, I'll tell you an insider secret, and that is there is nothing an an applied methodology or algorithm can do for you more than making sure everything on your website is properly marked up and the content all gets credit through Googlebot. So if I'm talking, this is about the limit of my technology coding abilities here, but just think about the concept of the way your website comes up over anybody else's is Googlebot going through and your optimization, right? When you have proper HTML5 code and your code is pure and everything is marked up correctly, you can't get better search engine optimization because everything within your website is read by the Googlebot. So that's what I want to say about that. There's lower development costs when you include accessibility from the ground up. I will share that often when people start looking at accessibility, if they have an old website, it's not uncommon to just decide to do a new design, but then include accessibility from the start. There's a great cost savings to that. It shouldn't cost, it's not a huge expense at all to include accessibility from the ground up on a new site. And so if there are developers or teams that work for companies out there that are interested in exploring that, please let me know. That's honestly a more fun way for us to work with clients. We train and work with your web development team no matter what, if it's an audit or whether we're doing a new development. But the part about doing a new development is that your teams will then learn how to do this from the ground up, and all the changes they make in the future, they'll have this new competency, and that furthers our mission. We do not want everyone to be dependent on us to solve this issue ongoing. Our business approach is different. It is to teach you how to do it correctly from the ground up, and then just be your rubber stamp, and that's why we monitor it for you. We'll watch it for you, we'll keep you ahead of things and in compliance, but we want you to do as much of the work on your own as possible because that's in the best interest of your company, and that way we're good fiscal stewards of your money. So again, proactive action items to reduce risk. There's a checklist in here. If targeted, separate, a little bit different action items. One thing I want to talk about is this third bullet point here, the A360 rebuttal report. If you do get a demand letter, and I'm going to show you one shortly, they often have a scanning report in there. What that scanning report says may or may not be true. And we offer a service called the rebuttal report. I could put a live user, a live auditor, one of my auditors with disabilities on your website with a screen reader, and they may have absolutely no problem finding your office, finding an email of an agent, filling out a form, reading about properties. But a scanning report may say that there's all these errors on there that would prevent them from doing that. Don't believe a scanning report is my request, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. This is a public document. I'm not sharing anything that in confidence. I mentioned Carlson Lynch, one of the law firms out there. This is what a demand letter looks like. It comes from them, and it often has this scanning report in here. And you'll notice it has things like this, and you maybe a lot of you have seen these. Maybe some of you are using a scanning report now, or a scanning tool now. It's okay, but I just want to point out the problems with them, I guess. They can tell you that you've got errors on all these pages, and it seems daunting. This may or not be true. You have to understand that a scanning report is a software or a SaaS. It is it's a piece of code that's going through your site. The only thing a scanning report is ever going to be able to tell you, or a scanning tool, excuse me, is ever going to be able to tell you, is if a robot can use your site. And I think we're talking about humans. So I use a third-party, lots of third-party actually validation to support this. The U.S. government has a statement posted about automatic scanning tools, and it simply says that, yes, they can crawl through pages of a website and evaluate certain aspects of accessibility, but automated scanning tools cannot determine if a website is accessible or conformant with accessibility guidelines. You have to conduct manual accessibility tests. So here's where I say, whether you contact A360 or you contact another company, make sure that the one that you use does a live user audit. Please don't rely on these. I cleaned up mess after mess from clients who had previously used these things. They sound like a good idea. They sound easy. They don't work. So get a live user audit, whether it's from us or someone else. Here's a very popular one. It's a Wave accessibility evaluation tool. This is free. You could, on your Office right now, go to your Chrome extensions and download this and put it on and run your site through it. I use this as an example of the false positives and problems with website scanning tools. And that is when you run it through the National Federation of the Blind's website, which, trust me, is 100% accessible to people with disabilities, screen reader users, it comes up with all these false errors. So it's got errors and alerts, it's got 12 contrast errors and all this stuff. So I just use this as a cautionary tale. You know, don't trust them, get a live user audit on there and see what really is wrong with your website. I think we're doing pretty good. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to turn it back over to Michael to ask some of the questions if any of you have them. But I also wanted to let you know there's some additional slides in the back. There's some myths, there's some facts, some trends, and some help. And so I'll go to these in order to answer some of the questions, or maybe if we don't have enough today, I'll go through theirs. But I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. So I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Hey, Michelle, we actually don't have any questions right now, so if anyone has any questions and wants to type them in, maybe you could go over a couple, some of that information on the next couple of slides. And I guess I do have one question. Is there like if someone wanted to run through their site with like a specific, like a tool maybe to see how a disabled person might be viewing their site to give them an idea of, you know, how easy it is to actually use. Are there any tools like built into operating systems or free tools that someone can use to, you know, maybe like have a site read off to them or something like that? Do you have any examples that they can use as a test?
I do know of one. I don't have it on the list here. So again, remember that an automatic scanning tool is not going to use any assistive technology, because assistive technologies were those pictures of the Braille display, a screen reader, you know, a different kind of mouse, all that kind of stuff. There is a program out there, a software called FANG, F-A-N-G. And what FANG does is it translates your website into screen reader. So if you can see my mouse up here, when you go to a website or using a screen reader, just like when you land there with keyboard-only navigation, you're going to start basically in the upper left-hand side, and a screen reader is going to read across and down the website all the way. There's no concept of on top of or next to. There's only before and after. It's linear in a screen reader. I really advise you to look at some of the videos we have here, which I think will really help. I do like this contrast checker. I think this one works really well. That'll tell you if any of you have some branding that is very like white and pale gray, things like that. You've got to have a minimum contrast ratio, and that's actually for most of the men out there. So 1 in 11 men, I think it's higher than that, are colorblind. And so a lot of people, when they develop websites, designers, they pay attention to contrasting and that kind of thing. A couple of other important things on here are 71.5 million baby boomers will be over the age of 65 in 2030. You young agents and you companies who want to be around, the elder population needs accessibility too. They need it for a different reason. Over 1/3 of American families have at least one member with a disability. They are big fans of companies who put accessibility first and include their loved ones. That obviously makes sense. Here's another big one really about you guys. The fact that, and we all know this just from all of our marketing in real estate, is that 95% of all recent buyers use the internet at some point during the home search process. There are people with disabilities every day buying homes. So they're no different from anyone else. if they go on your website and it doesn't work for them or they can't find any information, they're going to bounce off and go somewhere else. So you're turning away business is my point. The goal of marketing at the end of the day is really to engage the largest possible customer base, so do that. Here's a couple of quick myths, and then I'm going to show you a keyboard-only navigation if there's no other questions, because I think it's really valuable, and the people who watch this later will love it. But one of the, I should say the three probably, biggest questions or myths that I get are, it's hard to do. This is not hard to do if you know what you are doing. You can make it worse without expert help. Some developers will read some things and get some stuff pieced together a little bit. There's an overuse of Aria in web development to address website accessibility. Aria is an incredibly powerful tool. Too much of it is not a good thing. So we encourage Aria as a last resort to fix something, but not the first use of something, not the first tool to use. Again, no clear rule. Yes, there is. Here's my favorite one, though. Accessible websites are ugly. To be clear, accessible design is not to blame for unattractive websites. There are plenty of inaccessible websites out there that are unattractive as well. So this is just a lack of what accessibility is and how to provide it on your website. Before I jump onto the keyboard navigation or any other questions from Michael, I'll just say that your competition is paying attention to this. New websites that come online are including accessibility during development. Companies are holding developers and their third-party agencies accountable. So if you fall into that group, the best thing you can do is educate yourself and move forward. Live user auditors are replacing the automated scanning tools that have been around for a while. A lot of those came out of SEO or SEM companies, and I think it was a good move, honestly, for them to start providing it. I think this falls into the category of when you know better, you do better, and so get a live user audit. Customers are aware of this. Public is demanding that websites are accessible. And as I said earlier, users are noticing which ones are getting better. I will add to this list before we publish this, or I know Michael's recording it, but if anybody's listening to this and wants the link to the FANG software, that might be really interesting to everyone. These two are third-party articles. Again, I like to use the government or other people than us to talk about the difference between scanning tools, add-on accessibility, or the concept of a separate site. The last thing I'll say on this is there are some accessibility solutions being sold out there that fall into this category of add-on. If you hear anything about, we just add a piece of JavaScript to it and it takes care of accessibility, or our system automatically provides accessibility, be leery and investigate. Read the fine print, the T's and C's of the people who are adding or who are providing add-on accessibility. Those things can be very, very fragile. Carl Groves does a great job of explaining why. And in full disclosure, Carl Groves works for one of the biggest competitors or the biggest providers of accessibility in the nation, a company that has been in it a long time, grew up providing it for the government. He knows what he's talking about, and I have no problem pointing you to his article about explaining add-on or scanning tools because I want you to be well informed. A separate site, Nike did that years ago. It's a bad idea. It is really a separate site for those kinds of people, and that is not a good idea. I'm going to jump out to a new window here and show you a couple of different things. And Michael, if there's any questions, please go ahead and ask them.
Okay. Yep. We have one question here.
Sure.
Someone was asking, because earlier in your presentation you were mentioning that you should be more worried about the pages prior to logging in on your site.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So he wants to know what are the suggested practices for a non-public facing or private system that sits behind a login?
Sure. I'm just randomly putting in the word federal bank because I can show you on this what we're talking about. Publicly facing on any bank, for example, or any other website is anything that you can access here without having to log in, right? So when you get to their individual online banking and that kind of stuff, once you need a password to log in. I'm telling you to focus on everything that sits outside here now, pre-login. The reason for that is, if you think about it, you're more than likely never going to, well, you're less likely, much less likely, to get a plaintiff attorney to have somebody who has a login and then file suit or a demand letter against you. The majority of those demand letters are generated in mass, and they, in my opinion, and they are only looking at the public-facing sites. They use this. A lot of the lawsuits, a lot of the lawyers use the same defendant. There's one gentleman who partners with one of the lawyers, and I think he has filed 140 cases. There's one woman who's filed over 244 education claims through the Office of Civil Rights. Those people don't have your login or that background information. More specifically, what I would say about enterprise systems and that kind of thing, if that's more along the lines of the individual's question, is think about the fact that if you have an internal system that employees would use in order to add things to your inventory, your online inventory, or to conduct business, if only people that do not have a disability can have that job because your enterprise system or your proprietary systems in the background are not accessible, you could be opening yourself up to a Title I ADA claim of employment. A lot of companies don't think about their internal systems and if they're accessible, but that is already a law, and that's the EEOC and the Title I of the ADA. The reason I suggest going publicly facing websites first, then sign-in or mobile apps, is just because what I see out there as far as reducing your risk of being targeted. I am not suggesting at all that it's not important to do all of it. I'm just trying to give a level of priority to it. So I hope that answers that question. And then I wanted to show you a couple of examples of how clients of ours are using the logo. This is a furniture company. Down in the very bottom of their website, very similar to a lot of people, they have their privacy policy, their terms of use, and then they have an accessibility button. Once you click that, it launches a landing page, and you'll see that we help them write the accessibility statement. They have additional links and offers of support, and they have their logo up that the site is under review. Another way to do this would be as, I'm kind of going across a bunch of different verticals too, so you can see different business verticals we worked with. Dairy Queen has done it kind of similar. They've got a line here down at the bottom, and they put up a very well-branded accessibility statement there. The other way to do it is through a static logo on the bottom of every page. And this company, our friends, the Kardashian girls, have decided to do a static logo across every page. So regardless of the page that you're on their website, this logo will carry through along with some of the others. Real estate companies and banks tend to like this one sometimes because it is then on every page. E-commerce sites or casual dining have tended to do more of this approach. So I just wanted to share with you how you could use that logo. Once you go to monitoring, obviously this will change to monitored by ACE360. I can see monitoring always being a static image down in the bottom. We have 3 different versions of these. You should make this, they have not yet, but you could also make this clickable to an accessibility statement or back to a landing page that we co-create that says that you are providing an accessible environment and you'd love any more feedback and that kind of thing. Any other questions that came through, Michael?
It doesn't look like we have any other questions, so.
Okay, I'm gonna take an opportunity to show you guys one more thing, which I think is kind of cool because we have just a couple minutes left. When you go to, let's do this. Let's go to a really well-known accessible site target. I'm going to tab through. you'll see the first time I hit tab, you get this skip to main content. And then if I tab again, we're walking through the website and you see this line underneath where it indicates where I am. That is what we want to see on site so that we know that the focus indicators are working and people who use keyboard-only navigation can get through and land on the sites that they want to land on. A lot of sites do not have that keyboard-only navigation set up, and therefore you can't easily see where you are on a site. Another good example of that is the line right around where you are. This is very obvious. This is what you want to see. So I ask everybody in the audience to load your own website and only hit your keyboard and navigate through and see if it's very easy for someone using keyboard only or a screen reader in order to get through your site. So it's a neat little test that you can do yourself. The last couple things that I want to say about the offer through the South Carolina's Board of Realtors, feel free to give us a call and we can talk through what's best appropriate for you. If you have a larger site, if you also have a mortgage site, depending on your personal situation, we can cater this to make it a little bit more applicable to you. But I wanted you to have some idea of what a project like this costs. I think it's important to understand too, we don't need you to do this immediately. I don't want to light anybody's hair on fire. I do want you to start thinking about it and finding a company to provide a live user audit. But with us, it's totally fine if you want to do it in, second quarter or third quarter of this year. The parting message is just think about this in 2017 and be ready for 2018 so that, a situation like Y2K doesn't happen, right? Fees always seem to go up when there's a big deadline or something like that. We won't do that. But if you take the time to do this ahead of time and get your ducks in a row and get a plan, I think you'll save a lot of money and reduce your risk.
Thanks, Michelle.